Why does realizable pay matter? What is the impetus for why we are talking about this? And I think there's really four big areas that we're going to go over today and that we're going to touch on that I think really have an impact of why we're doing this webinar now and why we're even talking about this topic at all. The first is pay for performance, obviously something that's always been important in executive compensation, but it really has been elevated over the last several years as with the market turmoil that happened in 2008 and 2009, then of course the implementation of Say on Pay, where shareholders now have a vote specifically on pay for performance and whether or not they think CEO's pay is an appropriate and really executive pay is at an appropriate level. Second reason is really proxy advisors. They're someone who now use realizable pay. That's something that's included in their analysis of pay, and when they're making their recommendations on votes, that realizable pay can certainly have an influence and can shade their how they determine what their recommendation will be and what they recommend investors should vote on. We'll talk about how they're looking at realizable pay and some of the differences there in just a second. Thirdly, institutional investors obviously are incredibly influential now with the vote on Say on Pay, and they're able to give their specific voice to what they think about it, not just including the proxy advisor's amount recommendation and looking at what they say, but also looking at realizable pay themselves. In fact, institutional investors are using Equilar's pay for performance tool to look at realizable pay themselves. And so understanding what and how they're looking at realizable pay and understanding what conclusions they're coming to, what information they have, will certainly help your company in trying to decide exactly where they stand, how institutional investors are looking at them, and what assumptions and information that they have available to it. So again, that's something that institutional investors are using Equilar's model, and so clearly we're able to see that they are taking this and using it in their determination about how to make their votes on Say on Pay for the thousands of different companies that they own shares in. And then lastly, the SEC. There's rumors that they're going to come out with some pay for performance related rules. We've been waiting on these for several years, but it sounds like they may come out with something in the next couple of months, and we'll get into that later in the webinar. But as that comes out, those very well may be shaded by realizable pay, and it'll be important to understand that information, what realizable pay is, what the marketplace is saying about realizable pay, and what that calculation might look like and what it might imply, I think are going to be important to be ahead of the game instead of waiting for the rules to come out and then trying to catch up on learning all of this stuff. So we'll talk about all four of these topics as we go throughout the webinar, but I think those four really have the biggest impact on why realizable pay matters and why we're having this discussion.